What if tomorrow is the day World War III begins? Here's what no one's telling you. Let me break it down for you because the warning signs are already here. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. It doesn't start the way you've seen in old movies, with an assassin's bullet or a massive invasion rolling across a border. The next World War could begin with a single line of code, a quiet drone strike in the middle of the night, or a ceasefire that suddenly shatters. Imagine this: on June 13, 2025, Israeli jets streak across the sky, launching a surprise wave of attacks on Iranian military and nuclear sites. Iran's response is immediate, firing a volley of missiles back at Israeli cities. The old systems that were built to stop global conflicts are falling apart at the seams. We're living in a time of incredible instability, with multiple crises all simmering at once. Here in mid-2025, Russia hasn't just moved tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus. It has officially updated its military doctrine. This new policy lowers the bar, launching hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israeli cities and military sites. A fragile US-brokered ceasefire was put in place on June 24th, but experts all agree the situation is incredibly unstable. Both Israel and Iran are still on high alert, and any small provocation could tear that truce apart. If the ceasefire collapses, it could easily drag regional and global superpowers into a devastating war that would have immediate, worldwide economic and security consequences. It could be seen as a sign that the US is willing to get involved in foreign fights, but the political fallout could also make America less likely to defend Taiwan. A crisis over Taiwan or a deadly fight in the South China Sea could be the spark that ignites a horrifying war between two nuclear-armed superpowers, a war that would pull in allies like Japan. And even your water supply crippled by a hostile country or its hackers. These aren't just hypotheticals. These tactics are being used right now to destabilize nations without firing a single bullet. A coordinated cyber attack could paralyze a country, causing chaos and panic before the first missile ever leaves the silo. Australia and South Korea and open a third major front in a global conflict. Military experts predict an opening salvo where thousands of long-range precision missiles are fired by all sides, aiming to wipe out military bases, command centers, and critical infrastructure within days, or maybe even hours. The very thing that makes this moment so terrifying, the existence of nuclear weapons, is also the most powerful deterrent we have. The grim certainty of mutually assured destruction still forces leaders to think twice. Many experts think they would only be used late in a conflict by a country about to be defeated, but their use is a very real possibility. The paths to a global catastrophe are clearer than they've ever been, but so is the urgent need for diplomacy, for understanding, and for a shared global responsibility to pull back from the brink. The thousand cuts of this new kind of warfare are already making the world bleed. It's up to all of us to make sure they don't lead to a fatal blow. This is a conversation we absolutely need to be having. What do you think is the most likely spark for a bigger war? The risk of a global war is arguably higher now than at any point since the Cold War ended. A direct fight between NATO and Russia over Ukraine, the collapse of the shaky ceasefire between Israel and Iran, or a military blunder between the US and China over Taiwan are all frighteningly plausible triggers. And what can we, as citizens of the world, do to push for de-escalation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Russia's updated doctrine has already lowered the threshold for using them. As Albert Einstein warned, a third world war fought with nuclear weapons would be so destructive that the next war would be fought with sticks and stones. Our interconnected global economy would shatter, supply chains would disappear, and the world as we know it would be gone forever. After that initial storm, the conflict would likely settle into a grinding war of attrition, but with a terrifying modern twist. The conflict spiraled fast. For years, tensions have been getting worse in the Asia-Pacific, mostly over Taiwan, which Beijing sees as a breakaway province it will retake by force if it has to. China has been acting more and more aggressive, running drills for a potential invasion and accusing the US of turning the region into a powder keg. The United States jumped in. This has led to violent clashes with its neighbors, especially the Philippines, and these aren't just minor incidents. China's Coast Guard ships have rammed Philippine vessels, and their crews have brandished axes and knives in standoffs. What would a World War III actually mean for you? It wouldn't be a repeat of World War II. This time, the battlefields would be everywhere, and everyone would be on the front line. Because the United States has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, any Filipino death at the hands of the Chinese could trigger American military intervention. First to help defend Israel, and then going on offense, using powerful bunker buster bombs to hit Iran's fortified nuclear sites at Natanz and Fordo. This pushed Iran's allies, the Houthis in Yemen, to fire their own missiles at Israel, allowing for the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack on Russia or its allies. President Putin has repeatedly made nuclear threats, trying to scare the West out of getting more involved. The fighting is more brutal than ever. A desperate gamble could trigger a direct clash between Russian and NATO forces. That would almost certainly activate NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause, which means the entire alliance, including the US, would be at war with Russia. Peace talks have gone nowhere, as both sides are trying to win on the battlefield to get a better deal at the negotiating table. The conflict is a brutal grind, and the risk of a catastrophic escalation hangs over every single battle. Russian forces are pushing hard in the east, while Ukraine, armed with Western weapons, has launched its own daring attacks deep into Russian territory, even hitting air bases and destroying strategic bombers. In the Middle East, the direct conflict between Iran and Israel has set a terrifying new precedent. And in the Pacific, the United States and China are in a tense standoff over Taiwan and control of the South China Sea. These aren't separate issues. Multi-wave Israeli air attack by over 200 jets. The targets weren't just military bases, but key nuclear facilities and the command and control centers of Iran's military, taking out top leaders and scientists. They're all linked in a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and fights over resources, creating a global tinderbox where a spark in one corner of the world could set the whole thing on fire. Any one of them could boil over and drag the rest of the world down with it. For 12 days, the world holds its breath as these two regional powers trade devastating blows. It's just not a war of massive armies marching across continents like we saw in the 20th century. Instead, it's a war by 1,000 cuts, fought everywhere at once. It's a war of secret operations, economic blackmail, and non-stop cyber attacks that blur the line between peace and war. The United States gets drawn in, and the entire Middle East is pushed to the absolute edge before a shaky truce finally takes hold. That ceasefire is holding ... for now, but it forces us to ask a terrifying question. In a world this interconnected, how close are we really to the brink? Could World War III actually start tomorrow? What just played out in the Middle East isn't some isolated event, it's a symptom of a much bigger problem. Some analysts say that World War III has, in a way, already started. The flashpoints are obvious and they are dangerous. In Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine is still a gaping wound, threatening to pull NATO and Russia into a direct fight. The war in Ukraine is still one of the most direct paths to a global war. This is where it gets really scary. The danger is that a single miscalculation, a stray missile. The recent 12-day war between Israel and Iran was a chilling preview of what could come. It kicked off on June 13th with a huge. Iran's retaliation was furious. The war left hundreds dead on both sides and shut down the region's air traffic. While war rages in Europe and the Middle East, a third, equally dangerous flashpoint is building around China. The South China Sea is another hot spot. It's one of the most critical shipping lanes in the world, and China claims almost all of it. Beijing is watching the recent US military action in Iran very closely. If this all feels distant and political, let's bring it home. The first shots would probably be fired in cyberspace. Imagine waking up to find power grids, banks, communication networks. The start of a physical war would be incredibly fast and destructive. And then there's the ultimate fear, nuclear weapons. These scenarios are terrifying, and the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. So could World War III really start tomorrow? The honest answer is yes. But just because something is possible doesn't mean it's inevitable. The world is on a knife's edge, and the future has not yet been written. Like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think the world needs to do to avoid the unthinkable.